Some places on the map look ordinary until you learn who went missing there. At first glance, Redwood Canyon is nothing more than a stretch of dense forest and winding trails, the kind of place hikers describe as peaceful and breathtaking. But beneath its towering trees lies a silence that has unsettled even the most seasoned rangers. It's a silence that swallows voices, footsteps, and, at times, entire people. This is not a tale of folklore passed around campfires. These are real accounts of campers who entered the canyon and never returned. Their stories are scattered like broken pieces, leaving only fragments for us to trace. And yet, each disappearance carries an echo, a pattern too haunting to ignore tonight. We'll walk carefully into the shadow of Redwood Canyon together. The beauty of its wilderness is undeniable, but so is the mystery that waits inside, and it begins with the land itself. Redwood Canyon is the kind of place that tricks you at first glance. If you were to stand at its entrance on a bright afternoon, sunlight would pour through the canopy in golden shards, painting the ground in shifting patterns. The air would smell faintly of pine and damp earth, a fragrance that feels both ancient and grounding. To a casual visitor, it could seem like the perfect backdrop for a peaceful hike, a weekend of camping, or even just a quiet escape from the noise of everyday life. But spend more than a few hours there, and the canyon begins to change. The deeper you go, the more the forest seems to press in around you. The towering redwoods, some hundreds of years old, lean toward one another like silent sentinels. Their trunks blot out so much sky that daylight feels strangely muted, as if the canyon itself is dimming the world outside. Hikers often describe an unsettling sensation, the kind of awareness that someone or something is watching them, not in a paranoid way, but in a subtle, primal whisper that crawls beneath the skin. To them, Redwood Canyon has always been a place of contradictions, beautiful yet oppressive, open yet suffocating, welcoming yet distinctly unwelcoming. Old logging families would pass down warnings about never straying too far from the marked trails, not because of wildlife, but because the land itself seemed to resist those who lingered. Even seasoned rangers reported compasses drifting off true north, radio signals dropping without explanation, and the peculiar feeling that the forest was too quiet even for wilderness. And then there are the stories. Before the first official disappearance, whispers traveled through nearby towns about strange lights moving between the trees, or voices carried on the wind that didn't belong to any known language. Hunters spoke of finding animal tracks that ended abruptly in the middle of open ground, as though the creatures had simply ceased to exist. Others described the sensation of walking in circles, returning to the same clearing again and again, despite believing they'd been heading in a straight line. These accounts were always dismissed as exaggeration or the tricks of an overactive mind. But after the disappearances began, people started to wonder if those early tales were less fiction and more warning. What makes Redwood Canyon so unnerving is that there's no single detail that screams danger. No predators lurking in the brush, no cliffs waiting to claim careless hikers. Instead, it's the accumulation of smaller things, the fading trails, the sudden chills in otherwise warm air, the oppressive silence that grows heavier the further you step inside. And it's in that silence where our story begins. For all its natural beauty, Redwood Canyon has a history written not just in tree rings and moss, but in names that were never spoken again. The first of those names belonged to a group of college friends in 1979. They entered the canyon on a normal weekend trip, and they never came out. The first disappearance that drew national attention to Redwood Canyon took place in the summer of 1979. It began as nothing more than a weekend adventure. 5 college friends, home for the break, eager to escape the city heat and spend a few days beneath the trees. They were young, restless, and full of the invincible confidence that often comes with that age. They packed tents, food, a guitar, and even a Polaroid camera to capture the memories they planned to make. None of them imagined that those photographs would become the last proof of their existence. On Friday afternoon, they drove into the canyon, parking their car at the trailhead. A ranger later recalled exchanging a few casual words with them: directions, trail markers, a reminder to check in on Sunday when they returned. Nothing about the group seemed unusual. They laughed as they set off down the trail, their voices fading into the green silence. For the first day, everything appeared normal. Another pair of hikers claimed they passed the group near the river around dusk. The students had already set up camp, a tent pitched neatly, a small fire starting, the smell of food drifting through the air. They greeted the hikers warmly, even offering to share a drink. The hikers declined, wishing them a good night before continuing down the trail. That would be the last time anyone outside their group saw them alive. By Sunday evening, when the group failed to return to the trailhead, the ranger grew uneasy. At first, it was assumed they had simply lost track of time or decided to extend their trip. But when Monday came and still no sign of them, a search party was organized. Dozens of volunteers combed the canyon, calling out names that were swallowed by the trees. What they eventually found raised more questions than answers. The tent was discovered deep in the canyon, but it was collapsed, as if abandoned mid. Sleeping bags lay neatly inside, but no one was there. Their backpacks were stacked against a tree, untouched. Food remained in a cooler, half-eaten but not spoiled, suggesting they had left suddenly, perhaps only hours before. Most disturbing of all, their Polaroid camera sat on the ground just outside the tent. Inside were photographs of the group, smiling, singing, and enjoying themselves, scenes of a perfectly ordinary trip. The final image was a blurry shot of trees at night, unfocused and tilted, as though the camera had been snatched up in a hurry. Searchers combed the ground for tracks, yet, strangely, there were none. No footprints leading away from the site, no broken branches or signs of a struggle. It was as if the group had simply evaporated. Dogs brought in to assist with the search grew agitated, circling the camp and whining, but they refused to move down certain trails. Weeks turned into months. Families pleaded for answers, and theories multiplied. Some believed the group had gotten lost and succumbed to the elements, though no bodies were ever recovered. Others whispered about cult activity, or worse, something not human lurking within the forest. Law enforcement could not agree on an explanation. In time, the official case went cold, filed away as unsolved. Yet locals remember the shift in atmosphere that followed. Before 1979, Redwood Canyon was a place of cautionary tales and eerie rumors. After 1979, it became something darker. Rangers admitted privately that they no longer liked patrolling the trails alone. Parents began warning their children to never camp there, and whenever hikers passed by the site where the tent was found, many swore they could still feel the faint warmth of a fire long extinguished, or hear laughter echoing faintly through the trees, laughter that did not belong to anyone present. The 1979 vanishing marked the beginning of Redwood Canyon's reputation as a place where people could step off the map and into nothingness. And though the search for those 5 students ended, the pattern was only beginning. For a decade, the canyon waited, quiet and patient, until the next disappearance carved itself into memory. This time, it wouldn't be a group of young adults, but something even more unsettling: an entire family, gone without a trace. By the early 1990s, Redwood Canyon had already become a place of whispered warnings. Locals remembered the missing college students from '79, and though official reports had faded into dusty archives, the story lingered like a shadow. Many believed the canyon had claimed enough, that whatever had taken those young people was finished. But they were wrong. In the summer of 1992, a family of 4, 2 parents and their children, ages 9 and 12, set out for what was supposed to be a cheerful weekend camping trip. They were not careless. Friends described the father as cautious, meticulous about planning, and the mother as deeply protective. The family checked in at the ranger station, smiling for a quick photo before heading down the trail. That picture, meant to capture the start of their adventure, would later be used on missing posters scattered across town 3 days later. When they failed to return, a search was launched. The discovery was chilling. Their car was still parked neatly at the trailhead, doors unlocked, keys resting in the glove compartment. Deeper in the canyon, a cooler lay half-packed, food untouched, as though someone had abandoned the task mid. A child's toy sat in the dirt near the campsite, its plastic edges dulled by dust. Everything looked frozen in time, as if the family had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. What unsettled investigators most wasn't just the absence of the family, but the feeling that hung over the campsite. Several searchers later admitted they felt watched, describing it as a presence pressing against their shoulders, heavy and unrelenting. One ranger reported hearing soft murmurs in the trees, though no one else heard them. He would later resign, confessing that he could not bring himself to enter Redwood Canyon again. The search effort stretched for weeks, involving helicopters, dogs, and hundreds of volunteers. But like the students before them, the family seemed to have vanished without leaving a single trace. No footprints, no discarded belongings, no remains. The forest kept its silence. The town reacted with unease that bordered on fear. Losing adventurous college kids was one thing tragic, but explainable by youthful recklessness. Losing an entire family, however, was something different. This was not a group that had taken risks or ignored warnings. They were careful, prepared, and deeply connected to one another. Their disappearance shattered any illusion of safety. Speculation ran wild. Some suggested the family had fallen victim to a criminal group hiding in the canyon. Others whispered about cult activity, drawing connections to symbols etched into nearby rocks, though no official link was ever confirmed. The more superstitious muttered that the canyon had grown hungry again, taking not just wanderers, but the innocent in time. The story faded into the same unsolved silence that cloaked the 79 case. But the fear lingered. Locals began avoiding the trails altogether, and rangers reported fewer visitors. Redwood Canyon no longer carried the image of a beautiful, quiet escape. It had become something else entirely. A place you didn't talk about. A place you didn't enter unless you had to. The disappearance of that family cemented Redwood Canyon's reputation as a place of vanishing. But while officials quietly closed the case, the locals did not forget. Their whispers grew into stories, their stories into warnings, and soon those warnings would echo in ways far stranger than any missing persons report could explain. For a while, families and hikers disappeared. Others began to claim they had seen things within the canyon light's voices and figures that should not exist. When official reports failed to explain the disappearances, the responsibility of keeping Redwood Canyon's reputation alive fell quietly to the locals. They did not write case files or issue press releases, but they spoke softly, carefully about what they had seen and heard. These stories passed from neighbor to neighbor, grew into the kind of folklore that outsiders dismissed. Yet those who lived closest to the canyon took seriously. Some spoke of lights drifting between the trees, moving too deliberately to be fireflies, yet too silent to belong to hikers. They described them as pale, floating orbs that would flicker just out of reach, drawing the curious deeper into the forest. Others swore they had heard voices carried on the wind, sometimes a faint whisper calling their name, other times full conversations with no source. One hunter recalled hearing the laughter of children in the middle of the night, though no one was there when he searched. There were stranger stories still. A retired logger told of stumbling across an old trail he'd never seen before, one that seemed freshly cut and well-trodden. But when he turned back after a few minutes, the path was gone, replaced only by undergrowth and moss. Another resident claimed that his grandfather believed the canyon itself shifted, that trees would move during the night, reshaping the land so that no map could ever truly capture it. These whispers created a psychological trap for anyone who dared listen. Were they warnings born from truth or fear feeding on itself? The locals couldn't answer with certainty, but many quietly avoided the canyon altogether. They didn't need convincing. Too many names had already been added to its list. What makes these accounts so unnerving is not just their content, but their consistency. Different people at different times described the same sensations: being watched, losing time, returning to places they swore they hadn't passed before. Some researchers suggested mass suggestion folklore influencing perception, but others wondered if the locals were glimpsing fragments of the same hidden truth, a reality the canyon revealed only in slivers. Still, most of these whispers remain unverifiable, impossible to prove. And yet, when paired with the cold facts of those who never returned, they are difficult to ignore. For every camper who vanished, there was often someone nearby who admitted they felt something unusual, a shift in the air, a sound that didn't belong, an instinct to leave before it was too late. It's easy for an outsider to dismiss these tales as superstition, the byproduct of a community haunted by tragedy. But in Redwood Canyon, superstition and reality seem to overlap. Each story becomes a thread, weaving into a larger, darker fabric that no one can fully see. And while these whispers may unsettle the imagination, they are not the end of the story. Because even in modern times, with GPS trackers, cell phones, and all the technology meant to keep us safe, Redwood Canyon continued to take people. The most chilling proof came in 2007, when two young backpackers disappeared despite leaving behind every modern breadcrumb to be found. By 2007, Redwood Canyon was no longer just a local cautionary tale. The missing family of the 90s had been covered in newspapers, and amateur investigators online had begun connecting the dots between the canyon's strange history and the growing list of disappearances. Yet, despite its reputation, two young backpackers' best friends in their early 20s decided to spend a week exploring its trails. They were not reckless. They carried GPS units, cell phones, satellite maps, and even logged their itinerary with friends before heading out. In theory, they were the most prepared hikers Redwood Canyon had ever seen. For the first 2 days, their journey seemed uneventful. Photos and text messages sent to family members showed them grinning by waterfalls, cooking meals over a small stove, and posing beneath the towering redwoods. They even uploaded a short video clip, laughing about how quiet the canyon was. Nothing suggested danger, but on the third night, the messages stopped. No more photos, no calls, no updates. At first, loved ones assumed they were out of service range, but when their expected return date passed without word, a full-scale search was launched. The campsite was found quickly. Their tent stood intact, sleeping bags unrolled as though waiting for occupants who had simply stepped away. Their backpacks were neatly arranged beside the fire pit, food supplies untouched, water bottles full. Even their GPS units and cell phones were recovered, both fully charged and functional. Investigators checked the devices, expecting to find coordinates or digital breadcrumbs leading away. Instead, the GPS showed their last location exactly where the campsite stood, as though the two young men had never left. The cell phones provided more questions than answers. One device contained a short video clip recorded late at night. The footage was shaky, aimed upward at the trees. For several seconds, nothing appeared except branches shifting against the dark sky. Then came a sound, a faint static, followed by something resembling low humming, almost mechanical, yet strangely organic. The clip ended abruptly, the camera dropping toward the ground before cutting off. Analysts later admitted they could not identify the noise. Search teams combed the area in widening grids, but no footprints were found beyond the campsite. Dogs once again became restless, refusing to follow trails deeper into the forest. At one point, a helicopter crew reported seeing two figures standing near the tree line. Ground teams rushed to the location, but when they arrived, no one was there. Some searchers insisted they'd caught a glimpse of movement to silhouettes, perfectly still, watching from the shadows, yet nothing could be confirmed. Theories spread quickly. Some believed the men had staged their disappearance, though the lack of financial motive or planning made this unlikely. Others suggested they had fallen victim to foul play, but with no evidence of struggle, that explanation rang hollow. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Perhaps the canyon distorted GPS signals, or perhaps the men had encountered something more sinister, something that left no trace. For the families, the lack of closure was devastating. They clung to the eerie final video, watching and rewatching the flickering branches and strange hum, wondering if it held the key to understanding what had happened. Investigators eventually closed the case as unsolved, noting only that both young men had vanished under unknown circumstances. The 2007 case carried weight far beyond the canyon itself. It proved that even modern technology, our compasses, satellites, and digital eyes could not penetrate whatever force operated in those woods. For many, it was a chilling realization. If preparation, caution, and advanced tools offered no protection, then perhaps Redwood Canyon was not just dangerous. Perhaps it was unknowable. And so the legend deepened. By this point, the canyon's reputation was undeniable. It wasn't only about those who vanished, it was about how people disappeared without struggle, without evidence, without explanation. It was as if the canyon had a will of its own, choosing when and who to take. But the story of Redwood Canyon isn't just about those who never came back. It's also about the ones who did. Because while most were lost forever, a handful of survivors returned, broken, frightened, and unable to explain where they had been. And their voices reveal something even darker about the canyon's nature. Redwood Canyon is not defined only by those who vanish. It is also shaped by the patterns, the strange, unsettling details that repeat from case to case, as if the land itself is trying to send a message no one can quite understand. Investigators often describe a sense of distortion in the canyon, a feeling that the rules of the natural world bend slightly within its borders. Compasses refuse to stay steady, their needles drifting lazily, even on clear days. Radio transmissions cut in and out, producing bursts of static that seem to echo longer than they should. Hikers report losing track of time, certain they have only walked 4 minutes when hours have passed. Some claim to circle back to the same clearing again and again. No matter which direction they choose, these patterns might be dismissed as human error or equipment failure. But they appear too consistently across too many accounts. Rangers who once dismissed such claims later admitted their own unease. One described feeling the canyon shift around him as though trails rearranged themselves when no one was looking. Another swore that he heard footsteps pacing behind him, perfectly in rhythm with his own. Yet, whenever he turned, the forest stood empty. The psychological effect is perhaps the most disturbing. People enter Redwood Canyon confident, rational, certain of their surroundings. Hours later, they speak of being unmoored, their instincts tugging them in conflicting directions. The forest seems to know how to amplify doubt, to erode certainty. And once doubt takes root, panic often follows. It is in that moment of disorientation, some believe, that the canyon claims its victims, of course. Science attempts to explain these mysteries: mineral deposits interfering with compasses, dense tree cover blocking signals, the human brain misjudging time under stress. Yet, even those explanations do little to comfort. They cannot explain why equipment malfunctions in specific areas, or why so many survivors describe the exact same sensations to the locals. Redwood Canyon is less a geographical location and more a living riddle, one that refuses to be solved. It is not hostile in the way a predator is hostile, nor dangerous like a cliff face or raging river. Instead, it unsettles by refusing to play by the rules, by turning ordinary forest into something unfamiliar and uncanny. This identity, the canyon, as something alive. Something shifting makes its disappearances feel less like accidents and more like deliberate acts. And yet, amidst all the silence and unanswered questions, a few rare individuals have come back. They didn't vanish forever. They return. But they were not the same, and it is in their fractured stories, half-whispered and uncertain, that we catch the closest glimpse of what might truly dwell inside. Redwood Canyon. While most who vanish in Redwood Canyon are never seen again, there are rare exceptions, campers and hikers who stumbled back into the world, shaken, bewildered, and forever altered. Their survival offers more questions than answers, because none can fully explain where they were or what happened to them. But in their fragmented accounts, we catch haunting glimpses of something. The canyon keeps hidden. One case involved a lone hiker in the late 1980s who disappeared for 2 full days before being found wandering a logging road miles from his intended path. He was dehydrated, sunburned, and disoriented, but physically unharmed. When questioned, he insisted he had only been gone for a few hours. He remembered sitting down to rest against a tree, closing his eyes, and then waking up in an entirely different part of the forest. His watch had stopped at the exact moment he claimed to have rested, and he never wore it again. Another survivor, a woman in her 30s, described something stranger. She recalled hiking with her partner when they became separated briefly on the trail. What felt like 20 minutes of searching for him stretched into 4 hours. When rescuers finally located her, she kept repeating that she had been led in circles by whispers in the fog. She admitted the voices had sounded familiar, times like her partner, at times like her own mother. Yet each time she followed them, she returned to the same clearing. Her partner was later found safe, but she refused to set foot in Redwood Canyon again. Perhaps the most unsettling accounts come from 2 brothers who ventured into the canyon in the early 2000s. They returned after 3 days, though they insisted they had been gone less than 1. They described waking in the middle of the night to see a pale light moving between the trees. Curious, they followed it for what felt like minutes before realizing they were lost. When rescuers found them, both brothers were confused about the date and complained of headaches and nausea. The detail that stuck with investigators, however, was their silence whenever asked what, exactly, the light looked like. "You don't want to see it," one of the brothers whispered. What ties these survivor stories together is not clarity, but disorientation. Time is inconsistent. Distances stretch or collapse. Familiar sounds lure people away from the safety of camp. The survivors return, carrying fragments, half-formed memories that resist explanation. As if whatever happens inside the canyon cannot be translated into ordinary language. Psychologists argue that stress and fear create distortions in memory. Skeptics claim exhaustion or dehydration is enough to produce hallucinations. But the consistency of these accounts, the repeating patterns of lost time, strange lights, and phantom voices suggests something deeper. If the canyon is influencing perception, it seems to know exactly how to erode trust in reality. How to make someone question what is real until they cannot find their way back. Survivors do not describe monsters or attackers. They do not describe violence. Instead, they describe confusion, silence, and a slow unraveling of their senses. And that is perhaps the most terrifying detail of all. Whatever Redwood Canyon is, it doesn't need force to claim its victims. It only needs to shift reality just enough to lead them away. These survivors returned, but they carried the canyon with them in their memories, their fears, and their refusal to ever return. For the rest, those who never came back, the question remains: did they experience the same distortions? And if so, why did the canyon let some go, while keeping others forever? The search for answers has drawn experts, skeptics, and storytellers alike. Some believe the solution lies in human psychology, others in crime or accident. Yet more and more are convinced that the explanation may stretch beyond what we understand. Theories began to pile up, each more unsettling than the last. When the disappearances of Redwood Canyon are laid out side by side, the students of 1979, the family in the 90s, the backpackers of 2007, and the scattered survivors, a disturbing pattern emerges. But a pattern alone is not an explanation. And so, for decades, researchers, investigators, and armchair theorists have wrestled with one simple question: what is happening in Redwood Canyon? The most straightforward answer is also the most mundane. Some argue that the canyon is a treacherous environment, dense, disorienting, and unforgiving. In this view, hikers underestimate the terrain, wander off trail, and fall victim to accidents or exposure. Yet, this theory strains under scrutiny. How do experienced hikers, families with supplies, or young men carrying GPS units all vanish without leaving a single body or trace? Even in the harshest wilderness, nature usually leaves evidence behind. Redwood Canyon does not. Another possibility often raised is human interference. Could there be a predator, a hidden hermit, or a cult operating within the canyon? Some locals whisper about strange symbols carved into rocks and tree trunks, claiming they resemble ritual markings. There are unverified reports of campfires glimpsed from a distance, then disappearing without a sound. While chilling, this explanation has its flaws. No signs of foul play, no footprints, and no human artifacts beyond the victim's own belongings have ever been recovered. If a person or group is responsible, they leave nothing behind, a feat bordering on the impossible. Paranormal researchers suggest something stranger, that the canyon itself acts as a kind of thin place, where the boundaries between realities blur. They point to the survivor stories, time lost, voices calling, trails that shift as evidence that Redwood Canyon may not follow the same rules as the world beyond its borders. To them, the canyon is not just dangerous, it is a doorway, a passage to somewhere else, or something else, that chooses who passes through. Skeptics counter with psychological explanations. Stress, isolation, and fear, they argue, can warp perception. Whispers in the fog may be imagination. Lights in the trees could be natural phenomena, reflections, gases, or even the tricks of tired eyes. But once again, the details resist dismissal. Why do these distortions repeat across decades with such consistency? And why do they always end in silence? Technology, too, has offered little comfort. GPS units, radios, and phones fail in ways no one can replicate outside the canyon. Devices that should provide clarity only deepen the mystery, capturing fragments of blurry photograph, a strange hum, a frozen clock that refused to resolve into answers. It is as though the canyon not only swallows people, but also their evidence, erasing everything except questions. For the families of the missing, these theories bring no peace. Whether they lean toward rational or supernatural explanations, the outcome is the same. Their loved ones entered the forest and never returned. Theories provide the illusion of control, but the canyon resists them all. Perhaps the scariest realization is not that one theory might be true, but that none of them fit. Each explanation solves one piece of the puzzle while leaving the rest untouched. Redwood Canyon remains unmoved, its trees whispering the same silence they always have. And so the search for answers continues, not because they are close, but because the alternative is unbearable. To admit the canyon cannot be understood is to admit it could claim anyone at any time, which leaves only one final question. If the canyon chooses who it takes, what is it choosing for the rest of us? And with that, we return to the present moment, to reflection and warning. Because the story of Redwood Canyon is not finished. It waits, patient and indifferent, for whoever dares to step inside. Redwood Canyon has been called many things: beautiful, unforgiving, mysterious. But after all the stories, the theories, and the unanswered questions, one truth rises above them all. The canyon does not care who you are. Students, families, seasoned hikers, or cautious explorers, silence treats them the same. Those who vanish become part of a story that never resolves, a story the forest itself seems determined to keep. Think back to the 5 college friends of 1979. Their laughter frozen in photographs that no longer match reality. Or the family whose car remained waiting at the trailhead, doors unlocked, as though expecting their return. Remember the backpackers who left behind charged phones and working GPS units. Technology that should have protected them but instead recorded nothing but static and fragments. And then the survivors, stumbling back with fractured memories, voices in the fog, and time stolen from them. Each case threads into the next, weaving a tapestry of disappearances that grows darker with every passing decade. What unsettles most is the absence of closure. The canyon gives nothing back. It does not reveal bones. It does not scatter belongings across the ground. It does not grant investigators even the smallest certainty. All it leaves behind is absence, and in that absence, imagination fills the void. Perhaps that is its cruelest trick, forcing us to confront the limits of our own understanding. Some will dismiss these accounts as folklore, nothing more than exaggerations from frightened townsfolk or stories twisted by memory. Others will insist there must be a logical explanation, one simply waiting to be uncovered. But standing in the heart of Redwood Canyon, surrounded by towering trees that block the sky and silence that drowns your own breath, those explanations feel fragile, too thin to stand against the weight of what has been lost there. If the canyon has a lesson, it is not one of understanding, but of humility. Not every place can be mapped. Not every sound can be traced. And not every disappearance can be solved. Redwood Canyon reminds us that there are still shadows on the map, places where the human world slips away and something older, stranger, waits in the stillness. And so, as you listen to these stories, you may find yourself wondering, what would it feel like to walk beneath those trees, to step into that silence? Would you recognize the danger, or would you dismiss it until it was too late. The truth is, we may never know, but perhaps it is better that way, because the canyon is still there. It has not gone anywhere, and even now, it waits patiently for the next footsteps on its trails. If you ever find yourself near Redwood Canyon, remember these stories not as entertainment, but as warning. Some places are not meant to be understood, and some paths, once taken, do not lead back.